Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. We're here today on the Cabral Concept, our Motivation and Mindset Monday, episode 1879 of the show. Excited to be able to join you to start the week to go over one of my favorite principles that I've ever discovered and how it's absolutely changed my life. Not only has it changed my life, but I've been able to now use it in my private practice for well over a decade in terms of integrative health and functional medicine. But also previous to that, when I was deep into nutrition, anti-inflammatory based nutrition plans, and really helping people, I would say from an overall body transformation standpoint. So it always goes back to these foundational principles that I've been talking about for many years. This is the crux, right? This is the cornerstone of what we do inside of IHP. But it's really what I try to teach on, as if you kind of reading between the lines on every single Motivation and Mindset Monday. And I would even say, a lot of the other shows, because it weaves through the way that I look at the world. And I hope that by listening to today's show, you'll be able to absorb some of that as well. Because again, these are foundational principles. These have been around from the beginning of time. And what I'm talking about here today is something called first principles. I refer to it more as foundational based thinking, but it's all semantics as to what you call it. You want to think about it this way. First principles, and I've been referring to it over the last couple of weeks, which is why it gets its own show here today, is a different way of viewing the world. And I mean that through the lens of a different way of viewing our problems. Because if we look at our life, we don't typically contemplate how great things are going. We're like, oh, wow, things are going so great. Why? We almost never do that, although we should, because that will also give us these secrets into what we need to be doing in order to get into this flow state. And yes, I understand there always will be an ebb and flow to life, but as I've said before, you want those good times to last as long as possible, and you want the lows to be as short as possible. And that's, of course, our goal in life. I don't think we can escape all the lows, nor probably should we, because the truth is you can't have one without the other, right? That's the great Tao, is that you have to experience some of the lows in order to truly appreciate and be grateful for the highs. And what first principle thinking does is it begins to look at the lows or the health conditions, the body transformation issues that you're having, the relationship issues you're having, career issues, spirituality, whatever challenge you're facing, it gives you a new way to look at it. And it really takes the emotion out of it, which is what I like, because here's why. We all need emotions, but when you're trying to solve a problem, it's so detrimental to get emotional about it. And when it comes to yourself, we can't almost help but be emotional about our problems, right? Because it's not someone else's. We're actually dealing with us, which means, there's a lot of practitioners out there, and I'm very grateful to be able to have them listening to the show as well. And you have to understand is that you could be like on point with working with every single patient or wellness client that you have, or body transformation client, et cetera. But when it comes to you might not be able to figure it out. And it's because you're letting emotion cloud your typical first principle thinking. So let's get into this today, but I really believe that it could help you, and if not now, we'll use it in the future. If things are going great, then that's fantastic. But I would also say apply this to some of your big goals, because sometimes we're afraid to dream big because we're just saying, oh, that could never happen. I could never start that business because it would take so much time, so much money, and you don't have the time or the money, you might be saying to yourself. But using first principle thinking, foundational thinking, you're going to be able to figure it out. There's just no doubt about it. The same with your own health, and I'm going to be giving a bunch of examples today because obviously that's my field, that's my area, but a lot of people believe that they have these genetic conditions that they can't overcome because their medical doctor told them it was genetic and there's nothing you can do. It just runs in your family, and it's simply not the case. And if a doctor says that to you, then they're certainly not using first principles thinking. They're doing what they're trained to. And again, I get it. You go through medical school and you understand and you learn the disease pathology for the first 2 years. But then after that, you begin to look at pharmaceuticals as if they're the end-all be-all and that they can save humanity. And the truth is they can't, because pharmaceuticals are not here, 99% of them, in order to help with chronic-based health conditions. They simply mask the symptoms of those health conditions. Now, are pharmaceuticals great in life-saving conditions? 100%. Are they great for some type of congenital birth issue that you need them for? Yes, 100%. But, if you were fine for the most part in childhood, And then all of a sudden you got a dis-ease of the body later in childhood or teenage years or after. It's most likely some imbalance within your body, right? There's no congenital based issue. For example, if you didn't always have high cholesterol, if you didn't always have high blood pressure, if you didn't always have type 2 diabetes or an autoimmune issue or brain fog or whatever, skin rashes, then most likely it's just some type of imbalance you don't know about. I'm going to help you use first principle thinking to overcome that. I mean, honestly, 99% of these things are all very fixable. All right. We're not here to diagnose disease, treat disease. What we work on are the underlying root cause principles. And that's why really using this as a health detective based exercise, you're going to be able to figure it out. And I'm going to give you a big example here today. So again, first principles thinking has been around a long time. I'm going to get to it right now. A great quote by Albert Einstein was this: if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. All right. So what's he basically saying? He's basically saying we state our problem, but we never then think about it after that. That's it. So like, for example, you need to lose weight. Okay. You're so fixated on being overweight, then you're all the short-term solutions that it might take, you're not actually thinking about the problem itself. You're like, oh, well, everyone in my family is overweight, or I've tried a dozen different diets. And you go to all the negatives rather than, well, what's the real issue here? What are we really looking at? And we'll get to those examples in just a second. But I want you to know, you can use this for your finances. You can use this for your career, your body transformation, your health, your spirituality, you name it, you can use it for that. And you just simply have to get to the bottom of what's really happening. And I'm going to link up another podcast. So if you go to stephencabral.com/1879, I want to link up my podcast on the big rocks theory. It's very, very important. And I'm going to explain it just as a simple overview right now, but I would love you to check out that show as well. But the big rocks theory is this, and this really encapsulates a lot of this first principles thinking, that if you're given a big barrel, let's call it like a 30-gallon barrel, okay, and on the ground, you've got some big rocks, some big boulders, some medium-sized rocks, smaller rocks, you've got some gravel, and then you have your sand. If you want to fill up that barrel the fastest way possible, meaning to achieve your objective, you're going to grab the big rocks first, okay? The big rocks are going to fill up that barrel the fastest, okay? You throw those in. Then the medium, then the small, then the gravel starts to fill in the holes, and then the sand fills in everything else. That is the best way to solve a problem, and also the fastest, because the big rocks fix the problem, which is the empty barrel, the fastest, right? And if you want to look at it in reverse, when I talk about the rain barrel effect, well, I wrote something in that book called the de-stress protocol. And that's because that empties that barrel the fastest. You just have to go down the line and check them off. Diet, how's your diet? Good. All right. Move on to the next one. Exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal. Most people don't do that, right? They overlook it. What about rest? We're like, oh, well, I get by on 5.5, 6 hours sleep a night. Okay. You're getting by on that, but that's not going to resolve a lot of the issues you have, whether it be mood, cognitive issues, blood sugar, weight gain, etc. And then we have the emotional balance, typically overlooked, right? Oh, there's nothing I can do. Again, we have to look at that. And then, of course, there's the supplement protocols and the success mindset. So you want to be able to devise a plan that cuts right through all of that, let's say, clutter, that little man or woman on your shoulder saying, you can't do this, it's not possible, or this is all the issues you're up against, or genetics, or whatever it might be. And that is what we need to overcome today by simply pushing emotion out of the way just for a moment. Nothing wrong with your emotions. You should have emotions. You should not be robotic. But when you're thinking about problem solving, you need to separate you from you. Because if you're thinking about this problem as you, it's quite challenging. So whenever I'm having a challenge or a difficulty, what I actually think is I take my difficulty and I say, well, what if it was one of my private wellness clients sitting across from me, right? Over video or in person, whatever it might be. And I say, if it was their issue, what would I recommend? And this is how I get to it. So first principle thinking is this. You want to be able to ask the question as to what the problem actually is. And I'm going to give you an example today of high blood pressure, okay? A lot of people in my practice with the 75% of all-cause mortality. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes. Okay, that essentially makes up metabolic syndrome. We're going to leave cancer to the side for just a moment. So if someone has those things, and I can help them rebalance their body, again, we're not treating it, we're rebalancing, those things then go away because the body becomes balanced again. Now, if they went to their typical PCP MD, again, nothing derogatory here, you're going to be put on a pharmaceutical. The pharmaceutical does not take care of the underlying root cause issue, which means that inflammatory pathway is just going to find another outlet. Remember, most people who go on blood pressure medications often end up with cardiovascular issues and vice versa. Many of those same people end up being type 2 diabetic. All right, this is why we call it metabolic syndrome. We're looking at triglycerides and cholesterol and blood pressure and blood sugar, and it's a recipe for disaster. And the inflammation, the underlying imbalances just find new outlets because you're blocking one, such as pushing down blood pressure with, let's say, a beta blocker or a calcium channel blocker. Okay, you had high cholesterol, but now you're pushing that down because you're taking a statin drug. And so you have to understand that these things, your body isn't messing up. There's something wrong, something imbalanced, and it's just finding a new outlet for that inflammation. Okay, so let's look at it this way. You have high blood pressure, and your doctor just said, well, it's just poor genetics. Okay, nothing you can do, poor genetics, take these drugs. You have to ask yourself, and this is using first principles thinking. So remember, if you don't have high blood pressure, I don't have high blood pressure, right? You might not have high blood pressure. Maybe someone in your family does. But I want you to think of it like this, whether it's an autoimmune issue, whether it's a skin rash, whether it's brain fog, lack of energy, weight gain, financial issues, like whatever it might be. Let's stay with health because that's my field, all right? So let's go with that. But you have one of those issues, right? The blood sugar issues, the weight gain, the autoimmune, et cetera, okay? Any chronic issue. So you have to ask yourself this. These are the questions using first principle thinking. Again, but they can be applied anywhere. Did I always have X? So did I always have the autoimmune issue, the brain fog, the energy issues, et cetera? In this case, did I always have high blood pressure? All right, that's what you have to ask yourself. And if the question is no, okay, great. That means that although it may be your genetic predisposition towards high blood pressure, you don't have to have it. Because at some point in your life, you didn't have high blood pressure. And I don't care if it was only 12 years old and when you were 13, you had high blood pressure. Now, that would be rare, but it's definitely possible with kids today. So what do we want to say about that? That means that something became imbalanced in your body, a toxicity or a deficiency, which we will talk about, in order for those genetics to express themselves. Because your genetics never change, meaning the code that is hard-coded into your body is not changing. At least for now that we know about, okay? Now, the epigenetics, which is the expression of those genes, can change. So what that means is this: something changed in your life with your body to then allow for the high blood pressure. Now, you might say, well, it just happens later in life. Yes, it does happen later in life because you begin to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, right? That's what I talk about in the rain barrel effect. So now here's what we need to do. We need to say this: if I didn't always have blood pressure, could I go back to a time when I didn't? So this is first principles thinking. Did I always have high blood pressure? Again, insert your goal. Every time you hear me say high blood pressure, insert your goal. If not, so the answer was no to that. And if I didn't always have high blood pressure, could I go back to a time where I didn't? Now, your thinking might right away go to, well, I can't go back to being, 15 years old again. And you're right. Chronologically, you can't. However, could you go back biologically to 15 years old, at least in terms of blood pressure, where things are balanced? Maybe. Again, we don't have to answer the question yet. This is just first principle thinking. The answer is not always yes. These are the questions to ask, though. If so, what would it take to get back there? Okay? So again, autoimmune, brain fog, energy, weight gain, et cetera. What would it take to get back there? Okay, what were you doing then versus now? Or did, again, that rain barrel just begin to overflow, or did that rain barrel just begin to fill up over the years and then overflowed and then you ended up with high blood pressure? Another question to ask yourself is this: why doesn't everyone have high blood pressure? If other people are living like you, why don't they have high blood pressure? Now, one answer is genetics, right? You can be predisposed to those things. So for example, two people can be doing the same thing. One person might have high blood pressure. Another person might have an autoimmune issue, right? So why don't they? Well, there's a couple reasons why. We're going to go over those in terms of the underlying root causes, okay? So just say, hey, why doesn't everyone have it? And you can just say genetics with that. That's one possibility. However, there are many more, and we're going to get to that in the underlying root causes. Now, we go into one more. So we know the goal is to solve the high blood pressure issue. Again, we're not going to treat high blood pressure. High blood pressure is a symptom. High blood pressure is blood pressure with a systolic reading of 135 or higher over a diastolic reading of about 85, 90 or higher. Optimal blood pressure is about 110 to 120 for systolic and about 70 to 80 for diastolic. Okay, so that's just your typical reading. You want to take it upon waking. You want to take it before bed as well. You want them to both be solid. Okay, so when we look at that, we say, okay, now, could there be underlying root causes to high blood pressure? And the answer is yes. So the answer is yes. Are there underlying root causes to brain fog, to energy, to low thyroid, to autoimmune, rheumatoid arthritis, sarcoidosis, everything? So there's an underlying root cause of that beyond genetics. So if there is, now the next step in first principle thinking is to say, what would cause this? Positively, like what would cause me to then get to my goal? So meaning you set a goal for yourself and it looks like this. Well, has someone already achieved that? Okay, what did they do? What does that look like? And then we're going to break down the steps. So now for disease-based states, we're going to say, well, what would the underlying root cause of that be? And let's go through it for high blood pressure. I can't go through how to completely rebalance high blood pressure today, but I'm going to give you the specific reasons. So when someone has high blood pressure, you're saying, what would the toxicities be? What would the deficiencies be? Because that's why people get sick. That's why they have a dis-ease in the body. They have too much of something or they have too little of it. And I know that seems like overly simplistic, and it is when you say it like that, but there are deep reasons as to why. So one of the first reasons why someone might have high blood pressure is they have higher levels of cortisol and a hormone called aldosterone, okay? Aldosterone is essentially sodium sparing. It can help increase blood pressure. It does that to get into that stress-based mode. So what you might be saying is they're really a stress-based issue, but high cortisol would also predicate that as well. So cortisol could be an underlying root cause issue. What would be another issue for high blood pressure? Hardening of the arteries. Does this person have some type of hardening of the arteries so that when they pump through blood, the arteries don't expand like they should? They stay tight, okay? They stay hard. Again, all of these things can be resolved. This is not high blood pressure. These are all the reasons why someone may get high blood pressure. Does this person have hypercalcemia? Do they have too much calcium floating around in the bloodstream? Also, hardening inside of the arteries as well. Does this person have low levels of magnesium? Many people do. Hard to be able to balance the autonomic nervous system without enough magnesium. Hard to get calcium into the actual tissues, cells, etc., where it's needed, bones, without magnesium. You can't take calcium alone. What about low potassium? Difficult to balance calcium if you don't have enough potassium. If calcium is the gas pedal for the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system, potassium is the brake. Okay, so we need enough potassium. What about a genetic sodium sensitivity? Some people inside of their genetics, this does matter, they're a little bit more sensitive to sodium. Can they still have some good quality sea salt? Yes. Does it have to be taken with more hydration, more water, probably a little bit more potassium? Yes. Does it automatically cause high blood pressure? Absolutely not. But it's just one thing to be aware of. And we're talking about all possibilities. What about heavy metals? In my practice, I see quite often that higher levels of mercury or higher levels of iron, believe it or not, right, can actually cause higher blood pressure. Inflammatory, cause all sorts of issues within the body. What about higher levels of omega-6s, producing higher levels of prostaglandin, which means higher levels of inflammation, causing inflammation in the arteries, which means less expansion of the arteries, which means higher blood pressure, right? That's we literally have higher blood pressure moving through the body, arteries, and that's where we get high blood pressure. Again, it's a symptom. It's not really a disease. It's a dis-ease of the body, but this can be fixed, no doubt about it. And I'll give you one more here today, and that is excitatory neurotransmitters. A person that has higher levels of norepinephrine, higher levels of dopamine and other issues like histamine issues, PA, etc., can have higher levels of blood pressure as well. They're essentially sympathetic nervous system dominant. So when we look at that, we say, okay, high blood pressure all of a sudden went from being this genetic issue to saying, oh, I didn't always have it. Why might I have it? And that's what we have to look at. So now you say, okay, from here, now it's less emotional because I have these dozen or so issues and you don't have all of them. So now you just have to say, okay, well, if these are the reasons, if these are the underlying root causes for HBP, high blood pressure, right? If these are the underlying root causes, then I can figure it out because it's only like one of a dozen things. Maybe you have 2 or 3 of them, but you don't have all 12, okay? So now what do? Well, the next best step is to say, let's figure out which ones you do have. And ideally, you'll run something like the Big 5. If you've never run the Big 5, well, it opens up all of your mineral levels, your B vitamins, right? B vitamins are crucial for blood pressure as well because they're an anti-stress vitamin. So again, you start to look at all these things, your omega-3s, your gut function, all sorts of great things. That's called the Big 5. But you know, what you want to say is this. That's using a scalpel. That's that's precision if you want to run labs. If not, you can still work on all of these things. There's no doubt about it. It's just if we want to use true first principles thinking, which is what I do in my practice, I say, here's the possible causes, okay? Let me test those causes. Let me figure it out. And that's what we do. So that's why, again, I run the Big 5 labs because I want to figure out if anything's off of my body, I want to know what it is and why. But then when you get the results from those Big 5, or again, maybe you just run something like the stress hormones, mood and metabolism test, or you just run the starter kit. Like, again, that's up to you. I just want you to know that all of this is available for whatever health issue you have. But then what you want to do from there is, okay, now you figured out, let's say 3 things were off in you. Let's say, okay, you had higher levels of cortisol, you had some higher levels of excitatory neurotransmitters, and you also had some heavy metals. Okay, well, now we don't need to work on everything because we know that it's those 3 things. So what do? Okay, we know that we have to do a heavy metal detox. Got it. Check. Right? We know, and I didn't even talk about vitamins and minerals. That's okay. Let's not even use those. Now we need to work on cortisol and excitatory neurotransmitters. Here's the great thing. We know that if we're working on cortisol and stress, we're also working on those excitatory neurotransmitters. And we're also going to help get them out of the body through a functional medicine liver detox. So now we know, like, hey, this is not a complicated program. We're going to be able to get on a good whole food nutrition plan, these specific nutritional supplements to bring up those deficiencies and to remove some of the toxicities. And the body's going to begin to get itself back into balance because we are simply a facilitator for that. No good functional medicine doctor, naturopathic doctor, integrative health practitioner heals you. You don't heal you. Your body heals itself if you put it in position to heal. So that's why this level of thinking, this way of thinking can revolutionize any goal you set for yourself, whether it be for finances, your career, your relationship, your health, your body, your spirituality. And I would just love you to be able to just take a moment, write down one of your biggest goals or your biggest challenges, and begin to dissect it how we just went over in this particular show. So we want to first define the problem, right? You're not the problem. What's the problem in your life? All right, define that. Then work to the root cause by asking why, by asking or opening up possibilities, right? To just keep your mind open. Then what you want to do is this. In an ideal world, you're going to find the simplest solution. People sometimes come up with the most complicated solutions, or they come up with short-term solutions. There's a lot of short-term diet plans out there. There's a lot of short-term fixes out there. You don't want the short term if it's not at least combined with a long-term rebalancing-based protocol. And then you go about testing those out. Hopefully you're able to run a lab test or something to confirm, and then you test out those theories and you begin to put them into work. And then of course you recalibrate along the way. And that is truly how you're able to accomplish anything that you want in your life. I really believe that. The Big 5 labs, anything health-based, any protocol-based, we can help you over at Equilife. That's just EQUI.LIFE. But also remember, whether it's a finance, relationship issue, any of those things, there's a coach out there, there's a practitioner out there that has a great plan for you as well. And so again, I want to be able to always speak to you from the field that I'm in, but I also want you to know that this translates. It does translate into anything that you want to achieve for yourself. And hopefully I was able to offer a little hope here today that whatever challenge you're facing, you can overcome it and you can really achieve any goal you do set for yourself. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's show. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, if this show is helpful, please do feel free to share it with anyone else you believe it could serve.